Ramesh, but
oh yes, it started. Perhaps.
okay, thank you so much, everybody, for joining our session here on the global study of macro, meso, and micro aspects of open education during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a session at the OER Global, and we are recording this session, and we are very happy and pleased to share with you the first findings and results from our global study across 13 countries in all 5 continents. And I'd like to hand over to you, Ramesh, to give us a short introduction what we could find out during the last 1.5 years.
Okay, thank you, Christian. And friends, good morning, and early good morning or late afternoon, depending on from where you are. This is an international study truly. From here you can see our members who were contributors to that. We try to find the images of everyone. So please forgive me if I missed the photo of someone. We had our friends from Netherlands, Turkey, United Kingdom, Spain, Sweden, India, USA, South Africa, Australia, United Kingdom, Nigeria, Mexico, Greece, South Korea, France, Canada, then from UNESCO, France, Taiwan, United Kingdom, like that. So we wanted to, actually what happened that this current pandemic, it had shaken societies all over the world. And the first reports, they were published by the global organizations such as United Nations, OECD, that is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and in particular the UNESCO and UNICEF, etc. They described that how education system in all countries have witnessed severe disruptions and radical changes during varying degree of lockdowns. The normal education, which is in a way the traditional face-to-face education, it was typically interrupted because of the early identification of younger people, as they are more likely to be asymptomatic carriers of the virus. And this meant that the new and adopted approaches and alternative delivery modes at a distance had to be designed and implemented without delay, and or sometimes even bypassing established quality processes in vogue. In fact, if we remember, UNESCO had implemented a platform to provide an overview of all educational responses and resources to the COVID-19 worldwide. The focus of our research was how open education has been introduced and used for establishing and supporting distance learning in different regions worldwide during this period. And our key interest was particularly the affordances of open education in the pandemic and what could be learned from these examples. Like, did the online pivot and a surge in distance delivery of education led to more open approaches? Are there changes that are likely to remain beyond the ongoing pandemic? And through the analysis and comparison of regional case studies, we explored the strategies and the practices that were deployed and implemented, and how much they were built on open education. And particularly the focus of our study was the first year of the pandemic, that is until the March of this year. And so this study provides a responding to the impact of COVID-19 on formal education. We tried to profile global perspective on open education and open science through highlighting practices, use cases from several countries and regions, what challenges and opportunities we could find from there. Now,
may I add, Ramesh?
Yes, please.
And may I add that there was one key background reason why we did that, because we all, the big team of co-authors and researchers, are very engaged and proud of open education, and we tried for many years to implement that at a large scale. And we had a lot of difficulties. But now COVID-19 opened the door. Unfortunately, a pandemic had to come, but now open education, and in particular digital learning, became the new normal. And that was really a game changer, unfortunately, with all the bad side effects.
Yes, thank you so much. And this study here, we try to investigate how the operations for open education and support mechanisms for distance learning were established on a global scale during the initial COVID-19 period. The focus was on examining the affordances of open education and learning therefrom. So our intentions were to identify whether the sudden surge in distance education modalities also increased open approaches, and if these changes might become embedded as operational once the pandemic is over. So by examining these studies from different countries as a regional representation for the first year of pandemic, we deliberated upon the strategies and practices followed by institutions. So, Christian, would you like to add something from here? Okay. So, we followed a qualitative comparative case study approach. And while we acknowledge that the open has different connotations and interpretations in different regions, these case studies describing the impact of COVID-19 outbreak on formal education and how distance education was adopted. The data were collected from 13 countries, the Australia, Brazil, France, India, Mexico, the Netherlands, Nigeria, Spain, Sweden, South Korea, Taiwan, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. Our primary research question was that in what ways has open education been proposed and addressed using these distance education or online learning during the COVID. And the case study contributors, they were all experts in open and distance learning, experienced researchers and educationists. So it facilitated the collection of real context data and learning about open educational practices. This collective approach, it also helped us in triangulation of our findings, and so that we could focus on the research questions, and thereby we were much more confident about the enhancement of the reliability and the validity of our work. Primarily, what we did is that these collected practices and use cases, there were 4 guiding questions there. There were 2 general questions and 2 specific questions. The general questions were that, like, how was formal education affected by this outbreak, and what were the strategies and implemented solutions during this time. And we wanted to have certain focus on some specific related to open education and open science. So there the purpose was that how much have open education and open science been proposed and addressed, and what is the difference between original intentions and the current real impact of that. And the another aspect of it was that which good practices, lessons learned, and recommendations exist, and how can we as open education contribute in the future for that. So these were formulated broadly so that they can be easily adapted by the for the regional reports to reflect on the diversity of situations in relation to either the learning traditions, theories, support mechanisms, practices, as well as the given conditions and context. Because on global scale, we notice that the educational systems, the curricula, the assessments, institutions, resources, infrastructure, and even the laws, they differ from there. So we categorized these results on the basis of the impact, that how the countries, our case countries, they were impacted by this. So like most of them, the countries, they have a very high impact, and then some countries they have means very high, moderate on this impact for that. So that was there, and the results were quite challenging, thought promoting, and we could find that much to be deliberated upon, like the case of marginalized or excluded students group, because we found that these disadvantaged and marginalized social groups from particularly the lower socio-economic backgrounds, they were the most severely affected due to this pandemic. And in several countries, there were early responses to try and minimize this impact and to provide support, such as in the countries like Australia, France, and Sweden. In contrast, in Turkey, they reported a prominent digital divide, and that was the case in India too, in terms of what kind of resources, in terms of networking facilities, and when everything has been shifted to online. This led us to examine about the impact on infrastructure also. And the early findings in our study were the lack of resources, because we were not prepared for that, the infrastructure, equipment, the special needs, like that. And we found that most of the countries implemented open educational practices for continuity of education. In fact, as we have already found that the emergency remote teaching and the emergency remote education, etc., and how the distance education was adopted during this, based on the certain policy guidelines also they were. But there were certain cases when we found that either they are too unrealistic or too much restrictive in nature during that. And other the results about how the effective communication between the teacher and the students were established, because it is a crucial foundation for in education here. And in this pandemic, this foundation, it needs additional support, because our students, they need social support, they need emotional support, and particularly in case of access, they like the social media or various kind of virtual learning environments, like Zoom, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, etc. In fact, if we remember, Zoom in its basic version, it gives 40 minutes of free access, but during that time, that restriction was lifted. Google Meet extended from 100 to 250, and then there were some other features of their software platforms. They were also extended to support the student community and that faculty who are using these platforms for that. This also had an impact on the kind of learning experiences. And like in the European Commission, they had this digital education action plan, and a guide for remote learning was developed by Australian Council for Educational Research, which was like deliberations on open educational resources, etc. There were social media applications, virtual reality applications used in various places, like in case of Sweden, Taiwan, Turkey, and United Kingdom. In case of France, in addition to that, the national associations there, they promoted open access and open science in their region. This is also very interesting to note that about how the open learning was supported digitally. because mostly they increased support. It helped in enhancing the openness, and many companies, they came forward to offer their services and resources for free, which otherwise they have certain premium to that. And we found that in South Korea, there they adopted open education, which is very soon going to be legislated there. Then the Taiwan Open Course and Education Consortium, it provided more than 1,400 MOOCs. Those were aligned to the national quality standards. In case of India, the students, they continued their studies through digital initiatives of the Government of India. Like there is a MOOC platform, it is named as the SWAYAM, and the full form is Study Webs of Active Learning for Young Aspiring Minds. And then there is a bouquet of 34 direct to home DTH channels, which operates 24/7 for broadcasting high quality educational programs. Then we noticed many free webinars, training courses, use of open platforms, repositories, as Christian reported them from Netherlands, Spain, and Mexico. We found that those were very much promoted, and there were a lot of help was offered from there. In terms of open educational resources, the UNESCO recommendations, they found a significant adoption in most of the countries. Like in Turkey, a substantial use of this was quite clear through the open licenses, the pedagogical frameworks, and the models. Several initiatives in Spain, like the Connected, UNED, Aberta Emergency Remote Teaching Program, or UNIR TV, they are notable examples of the use of open educational resources. In India, we had this program called as Diksha, which is digital infrastructure for knowledge sharing, and the National Repository of Open Educational Resources, which is a project of the Ministry of Education and National Council of Educational Research and Training, offered many open educational resources in the form of e-content, quizzes, QR code, energized textbooks, the kind of phygital, means the physical book integrated with a certain augmented reality or those kind of experiences like that. Then we noted the use of Macred, which is a Brazilian portal for open educational resources. They also offered their open licensed basic education content to millions of students in the country there. So broadly speaking, what we found that all these factors which we noted as the impact of this pandemic on the formal education, we categorize them into these three categories. Some of the factors we considered them at the macro level, then meso level, and at the micro level. And then like the how the formal education was offered at a distance for the first time, similar approaches for the formal education, and what kind of missing infrastructure which is particularly related to. And it is a generally this, if we see the formal education sector, we were not ready to switch to open education by adopting the distance education practices. There has been a, in fact, even after more than 50 years of distance education in practice globally around, still the acceptance of that, particularly by the formal education sector, it is still a challenge. And we noted that in countries like Turkey, France, Mexico, and UK, there were reports of providing free access to online resources using television and internet. In India, the satellite-based education through the 34 DTH channels, it was found. And the OER usage was also reported through projects like Beluga in Africa, Diksha platform of the Ministry of Education in India. Then France, Nigeria, South Korea, and Sweden reported strategies for reaching out to disadvantaged geographical areas or the vulnerable populations in these countries. At Meso level, there were diverse teaching and learning methods and practices, and how the open education and the access to open educational resources. So they were mainly in combination with the demands for, the demand for means the access to open educational resources. And in general, the access to these resources is closely linked to educational practices, whether it concerns learning materials and documentations to be read by the students, or useful resources for educators to enrich and develop their practices. We found that in schools and in higher education, a strong persistence of traditional models such as books and manuals, it was noted. The institutions mainly focused on tools and workspaces for distance education, but did not explore much the possibilities offered by digital OERs and innovative open education. And we noted that the negotiations for granting access to e-published books and journals, it was the current actions by ministries, education councils, academic library consortia, which was supported by national and international calls to publisher with a particular focus on health-related disciplines. However, not only academia and publishing communities have entered a new phase of awareness for this, but for the benefit of open access, the teachers also identified the need of open educational resources to design and deliver distance learning with the claim of innovative open education and pedagogies. And further, we also noted that some institutions and countries have developed open policies and strategies to help the openness to be introduced in education systems, like in the countries, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Taiwan, whereas the other countries, they began to follow their examples, like in Mexico, Nigeria, India, South Korea, and Spain, to put in these practices into practice. At micro level, we found that the access and the monitoring of learning environment and the huge need for professional development, it was a really big issue and a big challenge during that. Because to build the capacity and competence there for the teachers as well as for the sports staff, either in group or in individual. And particularly, I remember on internet, there is a famous meme being circulated, you know, The Rock. He has the famous Bollywood actor, Hollywood actor, not Bollywood actor. Yeah, his image is that he is carrying a very big brown bag, very huge bag. And on the bag, there is a caption, webinar certificates, because there was a flood of so many things. But it was a good sign that the community out there tried to provide the capacity building programs to develop the capacity of both the teachers, the sports part of, and even for the students, because they need to be told about, now, if we have shifted to online teaching, how to handle your device, how to log into the web conferencing tool, and those things. So what we found that a kind of a strong differences among the teachers related to their technological abilities, pedagogical or digital competencies required for this distance learning. And this difference, like, and often the missing abilities and competencies of teachers to design or implement these opportunities with the help of appropriate either distance education approach or means in terms of the kind of modality, what will be suitable, or the pedagogical approach there to identify any existing tool or to adapt to a new kind of environment. Sometimes we found that either it is inadequate or insufficient, and sometimes it has led to complicated solutions which are being implemented. And therefore, there is a strong calling for agile, brave or resilient leadership and a provision for infrastructure in these conditions. We found that these experimental approaches by enthusiastic teachers, it coexisted with strong resistance, mainly in schools, while in universities, the culture of experimentation, sharing, peer learning, and the communities of practice, they were developed more radically due to the announced and long-term lockdown in higher education. Some countries have been able to provide training and support, sometimes thanks to years and or decades of experience in distance learning systems, like in Sweden, South Korea, India, UK, where these distance education practices, they have been, for a long time. But very large inequalities were also noticed, since this is massive change towards online activity. And most often they were made without any preparation. So this identified need for competence development for teachers, it also led to local or regional events and the kind of train the trainer activities. Like in India and in Nigeria, there were many these kind of events, they were organized. Like we gave the training to one teacher from an institution and expected that further they will be giving training to their colleagues. And for a deeper understanding and truly global perspective and analysis, what we need is a broader and longitudinal research to collect, to compare, and to evaluate all challenges, the experiences, and the solutions that were made with open education and distance education during this pandemic on a global scale. Ultimately, these are the things which we noticed, that how the lack of the open education or the low usage of that, there were not only the kind of digital divide, but even the economic inequality resulting in the affecting the infrastructure, the resources, the cultural sensitivity towards something there. So that have been very much prominent for that. And we also noticed that a bigger collaboration is required between the teachers there at the institutional level, so that the knowledge sharing, expertise sharing, etc. And how the digital education can be made more inclusive in nature. It's a hugely important need there. How means like the famous project of no child be left behind. We need to have everyone to be included into that. So what we found, that there is a need for open and direct communication from the strong leadership, which will recognize and how the role of the parents and the teachers, it has changed in this pandemic, adopting multiple roles simultaneously, whether it is work from home or working from online or like that, because this the pedagogy of care, the trauma-induced pedagogy, the stress, the kind of mental or the health-related issues, etc., the screen fatigue, etc., they were very much noticed, highlighted. And in fact, I remember that many of the institutions globally, they came forward with certain programs related to mental health and the kind of counseling to be provided to that. So that was very much important. And with air. So these are a certain reference. These are the references for our study here, and I now request Christian to add to what we have presented. So, and I'm just showing you all these references, and we like to thank our collaborators who have been, helping us to provide the necessary support during this study. Over to you, Christian. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ramesh. That was a wonderful, great overview of our global study and research. Actually, it's a poor situation that we have to look on. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to very bad situations, as you already mentioned. There's such a huge need to facilitate education for all now in the lockdowns and in all the difficult situations caused by COVID-19. And you could only present here the conclusions and the mainstreamed results. You can find much more details in our publications that were listed or are listed in the references, in particular on the first page of the references. And we have also submitted now the full reports, the full country reports to journals for also the big picture. What we all strongly believe is that there is a change taking place. And fortunately, UNESCO has also identified that need. The UNESCO OER recommendation is a milestone in our OER movement. And I'd like to tell you why. The OER recommendation is the first recommendation approved by United Nations and UNESCO since the establishment of UNESCO that is dealing with digital education and asking and demanding all member states, that means all 194 countries worldwide, to report every year on the current status and progress of open education and the movement of open educational resources. This is a big milestone and a big step toward broader implementation of OER and open education. And in our study, in our research, we were very happy to see, of course, bad situations in most countries and difficult periods for students as well as for educators and teachers. However, we have also found a lot of grassroots initiatives, a lot of good examples that we can share now, and that we can also highlight that there is an impact, that there are benefits provided by open education. That was something that we were searching for many years. How we can prove that open education can strengthen education for all, and in a way that open education is also combining face-to-face and digital learning in several blended ways, and with a special focus on policies for open education. We strongly believe that countries, but also decision makers, policy developers, and in particular, the schools and universities, the teachers and educators, as well as the students, can make a difference in the future. That's why we strongly encourage you to have a look what open education could do and is doing now. And we hope that our reports and findings can give you a better insight what examples are existing and what you can do in your countries and in your situation. Thank you so much for your attention, and we'd like to open the floor for your questions, please.
Hello, Ebba. How are you? Would you like to add to our discussion? Ebba, over to you, please.
We cannot hear you, Ebba.
Yes.
Yes, so hello, everyone. Yes, I think this study has really shown the importance of the need of the change in the educational landscape, and as has been presented both by Christian and Ramesh, and was very clear for our research, is that the need of a change of pedagogy of caring and well-being, and also the need of a culture of sharing, and that is very, very important. And that has been explicit in many studies, that the culture of sharing has been increased during the pandemic, and hopefully it will continue to be so, because it is so important. I think it is also important to stress that we have to move from the offering of institutions to the learner's perspective, what is really needed by the learners. So I think that is important to discuss. So maybe we can do that as well here in this forum.
Yeah, absolutely right. Thank you so much, Ebba, for also adding that. We have 1 minute left for questions. Are there any questions?
Let
Not
us see
at the moment.
the chat if okay, there is no message in the chat.
Okay,
Good.
then that means thank you so much for your attention, and we are very happy to share all the results soon. You can find everything in the references, and we are looking forward to our further discussions and dialogue with you all. We are very happy to promote open education and to introduce open education with you all. That means please contact us, and we will also try to find out how we can collaborate or how we can support you. Thank you so much. And this was the session